So I'm very, very appreciative to Stead Train for this particular grant. I didn't know much at all about the Turning Tumble. When I found out about this resource last year, my first thought was, I got to write a Stead Train grant for this resource. It's amazing, and I want my kids to have it. And it's such an amazing resource. Now that I've used it with my students, they absolutely love it. They can't get enough of it. They beg for us to get out the Turing Tumble. So it's a really different resource than anything I've ever used before. And I think you'll see that when we get to the pictures, you'll see that. I'm not sure. Ron, do I have control of my slides, or you do?
Ron does.
Okay, Ron, can you go to the next slide, please? So it was an incredible success. My kids absolutely love working with this resource. There were a few problems that I ran into, and those were all based on the restrictions that we have this year because of COVID. We have once the students came back into the building, we had some pretty strict protocol that we had to follow for safety measures. For example, at the beginning of the year, I teach a STEM lab. I'm not a classroom teacher. I'm like a specials teacher, like art and music. So the kids come to me once a week. Well, the theory was at the beginning of school, for all the specials teachers, instead of the students traveling to the school, they wanted the students to stay in their classrooms as much as possible just to limit exposure. So for the first half of the year, I was on a cart going to them. And it would be impossible because the Turing Tumble sets are large, and it would be impossible to carry those into the classroom, set them up, tear them down within the 40 minutes allotted, and go to the next classroom. And then cleaning them in between classes would be very difficult. So that has been a real challenge. The fact that for the first half of the year, I wasn't even in my classroom. I had to go visit all the students' classrooms. But then also the fact that everything has to be clean. Students can't share resources this year at all. They still can't. So that has been my biggest challenge, is just trying to find a way to implement this project and students not being able to share the resources. Because when I wrote the grant, I had in mind they would work in pairs. So I talked to many about this at my midterm report, and that's been my only stumbling block with this project. I really look forward to next year when hopefully they can work in pairs, because I feel like this resource will be better for them when they can work in pairs and talk to each other and come up with strategies to solve the problems. So next slide, please. So as I said, I plan to use it next year and the year after that, just as long as I can. It's a very durable product, so I feel like I'll be able to use it for a while. And just as far as the success of the project, my main goal was for my students to make connections between writing computer code, because that's like the main part of my position is computer coding and robotics and engineering. And so making those connections between writing computer code to actually using pieces on the Turing Tumble board to basically write code for the marbles to do certain things. So making a connection from something very abstract as computer code to something very concrete as pieces that they were holding in their hand. So truly hands-on learning, but in a very unique way. I've never seen another product that does this for making a mechanical computer, which is what the Turing Tumble does. So let's get to the picture so you can actually see it at work. So on the left, you see a student actually building solving the puzzle. There's a puzzle book that comes with the product, and it's a really a great resource, just the puzzle book itself, because it's a graphic novel, so it really holds the students' attention, and it's a space-themed book, and so they're really interested in the storyline. And then there are puzzles all throughout the book that they have to solve. They introduce the different pieces that come with the Turing Tumble, pieces like the bits that add logic, because they point, depending on the way the marble goes through the board, they point one way or the other. And so it's like a 1 or a 0 in the computer. And so it really adds logic in how they use the bits. There's interceptors that stop the way the marble travels. There's ramps that direct the ball through the board. Lots of different pieces that they use to configure the board to solve the problem. And so on the right, you see a couple of students. One of the ways that I solved my problem, especially first semester, when I couldn't go into their classrooms, I collaborated with our GATE teacher, our gifted teacher, and we piloted this project in her classroom first. And so we worked with 4th and 5th graders, and they were able to individually use the Turing Tumble, and that really helped me kind of figure out how that was going to work. Once I got the students back into my classroom around February, I was able to get them back into my classroom, and we could spread out and have room to use this. It really helped me figure out classroom management and how I would handle, them not sharing the product, and just how to manage it. And what I ended up doing is dividing my class, and half of them would use the Turing Tumble, because I had 12 sets. So half of them would use it one week, the other students would do something else, half of them would use it the next week, and unfortunately they couldn't work together at all. But at least they got to use the product. Next slide, please. So here you see students on the left working in my class. I have a huge classroom, lots of room to spread out. So half of the class, this is a 5th grade class, half of them were working with the Turing Tumble. The other half were working in code.org to write computer code. And then on the right, Ron, if you could find that play button, this is a 4th grader explaining how it works.
So at doing it, you press the start, that's your type in, and these are processors, and then it starts with a different.
So I don't know if you could hear her, but she was just explaining how it works, and she talked about how the different pieces that she put on the board were processing the information that comes through the computer. And so it really helped them to understand how computers work much better. And next slide, you can, I think the next slide has some quotes. Oh, no, this next slide is really interesting. On the left, the students are solving problems in the book. But on the right, one of the benefits that I really didn't expect, that I was really happy to see, is the creativity that the students use to solve the problems. In this picture of the 2 boys, each of them they were on the same problem. They were solving the same challenge. But as you can see by looking at their boards, they use completely different pieces. Both of them met the objective in the problem, but they solved it in 2 completely different ways. And I really liked the way that I did not expect that. I expected it to be, pretty much one, because there's only a certain number of pieces that they can place on the board. I expected it to be much more closed-ended, where they had to solve it a certain way. But the students themselves saw that there can be many solutions to the same problem. And I really love that they saw it was very open-ended, and they could use their creativity to solve the problems and still meet the objective. Next slide, please. So as I said, my goal was for my students to make a more concrete connection of how they understood how a computer worked. And they were able to do that definitely. Some of the quotes from my students were, it shows you how information moves through a computer. Once you start playing it, you can't stop. And as I said, they begged for us to use the Turning Tumble. They absolutely loved it. Another student said, inside of a computer, but instead of wires, you are using plastic gadgets. I love that quote. It's like writing code, but you are building the code with the pieces to tell the marble where to go. I learned there can be multiple ways to solve a problem. I've learned there's a lot of logic behind how a computer works, and they can do complex things depending on the triggers you put in place. So just from their quotes, the words of the students, you can see they really learned a lot about how computers work, and it's such an abstract concept for them, writing code and how computers work. This particular project allowed them to hold pieces in their hand, and STED trains all about hands-on learning, and they held pieces in their hand, they configured the board, and they really did come away from it having a much better understanding of how computers work. So complete success. I can't wait to use the product, and we'll still be using it through the end of the year, but I can't wait next year to get it back out when hopefully we'll be able to work together in groups again, because that's really where the magic happens, the discussion and the strategy and the conversations that the students have. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.